We're welcome to have him back again. He's a former British diplomat and MI6 officer with decades of experience in the Middle East and European security affairs. He's also served as a senior advisor to the European Union and is the founder of the Conflicts Forum, which you can find on Substack. Alastair, welcome back to the show, as always.
Oh, well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, listen, I was really grateful that we had you on specifically today, coming right on the heels of this negotiations inside in Switzerland between the United States and Iran. Lot of confusion about what's actually on the table, what the terms were, et cetera. Seems like the United States said they're going to do one thing on the negotiating front. You had the Iranians thinking that they're talking about something different, and we're not sure what's coming out of it. But what can you tell us? Because you were telling us just before we came on the air that you've had some conversations with some of those in Tehran, and from the Iranian perspective, how do they view the talks yesterday?
Well, as you know, there was quite a determined effort to put a positive gloss on the talks. But if you look at what was demanded by the United States side and the response of the Iranian, I think you can see for yourselves the chance of sort of splitting the difference or getting to a result is fairly low. The Americans demanded the complete dismantling of Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, transfer of all enriched uranium to the United States, the ending of all sunset clauses, that refers to the JCPOA clauses, after which Iran, they no longer apply to Iran and they're free to do as they choose. And the demand for zero enrichment, with only the Tehran research reactor allowed to remain enriching and producing nuclear energy. And then finally, that minimal sanctions relief is offered by the American team, with any further release only after full compliance on all of those elements. Well, predictably, Tehran rejected the demands, insisted on the recognition of its right to enrich uranium, rejected zero enrichment, refused to transfer enriched uranium from the territory, and insisted that any agreement must both include recognition of the right to enrich and a significant lifting of all sanctions. Iran completely rejects the notion of indefinite restrictions being imposed on the state. So those, as you can see, the demands from the US side, from the Trump team, are pretty maximalist. They are really formulated, in my view, to obstruct rather than facilitate a diplomatic solution.
What are the view from Tehran? Do they feel like, or are they coming to believe that the die is cast, that there is going to come a conflict? Do they still think that there is at least a potential negotiated way out?
No, I don't think so. I think that in Iran, there's actually quite a confident mood there, and quite a robust mood, I would describe it. And I don't think, no, they don't think that. I don't think, they are going to make the attempt, they're making the attempt to try and find a solution. But they're not counting on that at all. They don't really expect that. But it's important, both domestically and internationally, that, they make the attempt at it. But no, they don't expect that it'll produce a result. I think when I read out those two sets of demands, I think it's fairly clear that it's going to be very difficult to find a solution, particularly a solution that can be presented by President Trump as a win for him, a clear win. Because if it's presented, if it turns out to be some form of limited enrichment, some, if you like, very limited enrichment, it would have to be further than just reactor, the research reactor in Tehran. That's been around since the 50s. I think it was actually built by the Americans and has been in operation, I think, from 67 or something. Produces isotopes and medicines for cancer. It doesn't produce any energy for industry or any other purpose. It's just a research reactor. And so they reject that entirely. So I think the mood is fairly tough. They are preparing. They feel that they are ready now and prepared. Of course, if the talks go on a bit longer, it gives Iran more time to prepare. It gives the United States more time to get assets into position. The United States continues to move aircraft into position. The ill-fated Gerald Ford is now into position of Israel. I see. So most of these things are continuing. It's not giving a sense of, if you like, a preparedness for sort of the possibility of pulling back. It's still actually the momentum. And I underline that because in all the conflicts I've been involved, the momentum of war, the momentum of logistics of war, once the sort of spring is unwound and starts moving, I mean, everything comes and it's a flow, and it's very hard to pull it back. It's like that famous First World War affair where, all the trains were moving with the weapons of war and the municipalities, and it was on a single track and you couldn't pull them back. And so in a way, I mean, of course, you can get aircraft to come back, but there is this huge momentum, and there is a huge political momentum, which, of course, Iran understands, coming from Netanyahu, from Israel, from Israeli auxiliaries in the United States, their friends and auxiliaries and donors, to push for it, because from the Israeli perspective, and looking through the Hebrew press in these last few days, I mean, for many of them, this is once in a generation.
Yeah,
opportunity.
and I can certainly corroborate that. Just in my own experience, I've had two opportunities to see the momentum of war that you talk about with both Desert Storm, which I was on the ground for in Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, where I was in the Pentagon helping to prepare the building up of that force. So I have definitely seen that and understand both the political and the military momentum. I want to touch on something here, Gary. This is a little out of order, but since Alastair just mentioned it, I want to go there first. You mentioned about the view from the Israeli side and about the once-in-a-generation opportunity. The guy who's been leading the charge on that has been Naftali Bennett. And yesterday, he went on Fox News to give his current update about his momentum.
The 10 million Israelis living here in Israel, we are the boots on the ground of the free world. We're the ones who will pay the price of any retaliation or something of that sort. But we understand that it's a price that we are willing to pay in order to remove this threat from the world. I also want to point out to American viewers that as of now, Iran is pursuing intercontinental ballistic missiles, which means in simple English, missiles that you can launch from Tehran and will land in New York or Tennessee or California. The only reason a nation develops this sort of thing is it's for nuclear war tip. If Americans don't want to meet those sort of missiles in the New York streets, 9/11, nuclear 9/11, this is the time to act.
So a couple of things I want to point out from that, because I think it's really important. Number one, and I'm actually going to juxtapose this with something else you just said, which I'd like to ask you to expound on a little bit. He's talking about how he views, and this is certainly many in Israel who do, and I've heard from some comments just in the last 24 hours that they understand that Iran, if this gets into a war, that Iran's missiles are going to get through and it's going to cause damage. And they seem to be okay with that. They have a confidence. You just mentioned that the Iranian side also has a confidence, and they know that American and probably Israeli missiles are going to get through here. First of all, let me ask you, why does the Iranian side have any kind of solidity or confidence that you see?
Okay, but I'll first of all go to the other side of your point, which
Sure.
was in Israel, and it's quite clearly because, as you know, we follow the press and the Hebrew press, which has got a completely different narrative to the English language press. And what Bennett is saying is simply not true. The Israelis are very concerned, ordinary Israelis. The Zionists, the right wing, the ardent supporters of Israel, of course, are all, they have this vision that, that after this, the Middle East, after Iran is removed from the equation, there will be a new Middle East. And as you know, Modi was just there visiting. So they said, there's going to be a new alliance, which will be Israel, India, and a pro-Western Iran fighting radical Islam across the Middle East. And this is the vision that they, of course, it's fantasy and completely unrealizable. But I mean, this is what they're, this is the propaganda, and the propaganda has got a huge momentum at the moment.
And let me just ask you, since you brought that topic up there, what is the benefit for India to make this trip to Israel at this time? I mean, I'm sure this was planned a long time ago, but the conditions certainly couldn't be lost on anyone. What is the benefit for India?
Weapons. Israel has promised India weapons. It virtually lost the last war with Pakistan. It's promised it weapons it is not given to anyone else. And so, I mean, India is being bought with weapons effectively more than with anything else. And also, Modi has a strong affinity to Zionism. The Hinduvat sort of ideology, not an ideology, it's not a political process, it's a sort of nationalism, a form of wider nationalism. He has said on not this visit, but previous visits, how akin it is to Zionism. So, I mean, there is a sort of, is a natural affinity there between Modi and Israel. So that's not so unexpected. But effectively, what he's also reflecting is that the whole route that used to exist, that was being planned, the route, the corridor that was going to go through from India to Haifa port in Israel, is now not viable. So he's looking for trying to find some other way of doing this through Syria, which now Israel controls some part of it, to find some sort of corridor for trade in a different way. So I think that's why he's there.
Okay.
But you said culturally, no, the many Israelis are really quite fearful about what's going to come next. They recall what happened before in the 12-day war, and they know, despite the censorship, what struck them. So they are quite anxious about it.
No, but you said that in Iran they have a silent, I don't remember the exact word you used, but something like they have a confidence, you said, even though they know what's coming, they also know what's coming. Upon what would they base their confidence?
It's a cultural, but it's also about Shiism. Shiism has always had this ability to sustain sacrifice and loss. And the Shia have experienced this over 1,000 of years. And so, no, they are much more able to consider and understand the idea of sacrificing one's life for the community, for the people, for the country. Is quite foreign to us, secular Westerners. But this is something that is very prevalent there. At one point, they were warned they went to go to the mosque by the Sunni caliphs of the time, were at the penalty of having a finger cut off every time they tried to do so. And they kept going. They had one finger, two finger, then they had their hands cut off, they had the legs cut off, and they were still going to the mosque. They are, they have a different sort of moral outlook, a different metaphysical outlook. from Israel or from secular or Western society.
Fascinating. I'm going to come back. I'm going to circle around again to the Shia issue in just a second to explain the bastardization of that in the United States. More on that in a second. But I don't want to leave yet. One of the other things Bennett said here, which because I think is really important, is that he made a big point at the end of that, even to the point of walking over the host when he was trying to move him on to something else. He wanted to say, this is our fight too, America's fight too. It's not just Israel, because there's going to be missiles flying into New York City, into Tennessee, into California. Nuclear 9/11's coming to you if you don't take action now. What do you make of his attempt to tie this to American national security?
Well, this is just, isn't this a sort of replay of what happened in the Iraq War? And America was told, there were weapons of mass destruction and, that these, the Scud missiles, I could remember, we were being told could be landed in London in 40 minutes or something like this. And it was all complete bunkum. And I know it was bunkum because I was involved to a certain extent then. But what he's suggesting is complete nonsense. There is no evidence at all and no intelligence. And I don't know if Tulsi Gabbard has said that specifically. I think she has, or at least her office has said there's no evidence whatsoever of that. Just like there is no evidence that Iran has a nuclear weapon and no evidence of it preparing for any attack on the United States. Iran has no quarrel with the United States, has never attacked the United States, and is not, if you like, a supporter of terrorism. On the contrary, it has fought against particularly the extremist elements such as ISIS.
Well, now let's just keep going down that path here, because that sounds like a concerted effort among some quarters in Israel and in the United States to paint this picture for the American public, to draw up this real era of fear that you have to be afraid of what Iran's going to do, because they are coming after us with nuclear weapons and everything else. And circling back to the Shia issue. You talked about what the reality of the Shia is and some of the things that it affects within Iran itself. But on our side, you had yesterday morning, from the floor of the United States Senate, Senator Kennedy went out and said this about Shia Islam.
I'm entitled to believe what I want. But the Ayatollah not only thinks that I'm going to hell because I don't agree with his religion, he wants to kill me. He wants to kill Americans and Israelis and anybody who does not believe in his jihad and drink our blood out of a boot. And he's acted on that. I don't need to tell you, Mr. President. I don't need to tell you. And he has acted on that. And that's not acceptable. The Ayatollah has decided he wants a nuclear war yet. Why should we care? I hear from some of my fellow Americans all the time, why do we need to be involved in Iran? Why should we care? Well, number one, we're not trying to start a war in Iran. The president is trying to end a war in Iran. If the Ayatollah gets a nuclear weapon, he will use it.
So let's several things I want to talk about there. Let's first of all talk about the one that was the oddest of all that. He says that the Ayatollah wants to drink our blood out of a boot. I have no idea what that's talking about. Do you know anything about that?
No, I think that the whole speech of his, was absolute rubbish, complete BS. There was no part of it that had any resemblance to truth whatsoever. It is the Ayatollah who has issued the fatwa against, if you like, against nuclear weapons. And don't forget that during the Iran-Iraq war in the 70s and later, when Iraq was given chemical weapons by European countries, and which they used against the Iranians and killed many of them, millions were killed or injured by those chemical weapons, Iran did not respond, and did not respond with chemical weapons of their own or nuclear weapons or any weapons of mass destruction, because they feel that is contrary to the ethos of Shia Islam. So this is just a complete and utter nonsense that he's talking. So the Ayatollah, who actually is a very educated and very clever man, just as his predecessor was, a very well-learned person. I mean, I studied some of his writings and his works. I mean, he knew Western philosophy almost better than most Western philosophers. And even recent leaders in Iran were world authorities in Western philosophy. In Iran, if you if you study philosophy, you have to study both Western philosophy and Iranian. It is required, so that you do have a proper understanding of where it comes from. So their metaphysics, their whole approach to life is quite contrary to that. They do not engage, and they have no quarrel with the United States.
Okay, so
they are not enemies.
I want to go back to one of the other things that he said there, because this is something that's commonly said in the United States, and that is, now you've already addressed the part that he said, he told an American audience there that the Ayatollah has decided to get a nuclear weapon, despite the fact that contradicts, as you said, what Tulsi Gabbard's testimony was in March of last year and every year prior to that by her predecessors. That's one thing. But then the other thing, that if he says if he gets it, they will use it. This is another thing that's coming up. For them to use it, you would have to understand and accept that that is a suicidal desire, that they want to get this nuclear weapon because they know that if they use it, that there will be a retaliation tenfold on whatever that they would be able to launch out there. But these people are claiming, like Senator Kennedy, that that's what they will do. Ergo, to stop the first strike from happening, because sure, we'll respond, but we'll lose millions of people in wherever this bomb lands, then we have to act now. But my question to you is Shia Islam suicidal?
Absolutely not. There's a vast difference between... Actually, one of my complaints most when I go to Iran, I said, your problem in not understanding the West is because you're too rational, and you don't understand that the West is emotive and emotional more than it is rational. And so you sometimes misunderstand the West. And so absolutely not. And the idea that he's made a secret to a decision, there is a fatwa, which is a religious instruction against weapons of mass destruction, which has been issued. If that was changed or altered, then that would be public, and it would be proclaimed, and everyone would know about it. And he has not changed it. It's been the same. He prohibited any weapons operations from 2003, as American intelligence services long since said. Since 2003, he's issued an absolute prohibition on weapons. So all of this is just manufactured propaganda that is coming out. We can guess from what quarters that this sort of propaganda comes. And the idea that there's something that he's against, particularly America, or would use it, is not true. As I say, during the Iran-Iraq war, they were very restrained. They would not use, if you like, weapons of mass destruction against.
Yeah, I think that's really important. This is not just a theory. This is something there is some actual evidence to see that they have done on a weapon of mass destruction, so that's even more applicable here. Let's look at where the negotiations were. We started off talking about that there was meetings in Switzerland yesterday between the two sides, and now you have the two narratives that are going out that are being talked about here. Interestingly, most of the people in the United States are saying, well, I think that this is that's the last for negotiations, and it's going to be a war here. We'll actually show you some of that in a minute. But there's one guy, actually, a retired General McKenzie, who used to be the Central Command commander, actually thinks that maybe that there is still room for having negotiation. But he said to have a good diplomacy, you need a good fist.
Iranians are people who count things. For us to have a credible threat against them, you have to bring that in. I actually am not of the opinion that it's necessarily going to be used. But the Iranians are going to look at it. They're going to understand the correlation of forces, is the phrase they would use to describe it. So you need that combat capability there, as also as described, not only to strike Iran, but to be able to defend ourselves against a probable Iranian counterstrike. So all that is very much necessary if we're going to execute these kinds of operations, or more directly, I would say, support the diplomacy that's ongoing with a fist behind it.
I mean, that's your profession. You were a diplomat for decades. Is a good fist necessary for good diplomacy?
No, I would talk with the Iranians, and I did talk about the nuclear issue with them many years ago. I'm not part of it now, but I talked to the Security Council, the members of the Security Council, about it. They were entirely rational, and it was entirely a discussion based on rationality and good sense, and they understood the position. Now you're talking about, and he's talking about, this Western obsession, which is, deforming the whole of, I believe, American foreign policy with, the only way to get anything is through pressure on Russia, pressure on Putin, pressure. We need more pressure. We need more use of missiles to make people understand. Well, actually, sometimes, it doesn't work, and it just makes people more determined to continue. And Iran does have principles. And that is why one of the biggest movements, one of the biggest parties there, is called the Principalists. And they stand on the principles, and they believe in the principles of the Iranian Revolution. And those principles are still held today by many, many Iranians, because they were based on the idea of social justice for all. So there is a strong support for Iran and for the principles on which it's standing. And there is huge support for the Supreme Leader. You only had to have looked at the Republic Day that they had recently. Millions came out to support the Islamic Republic and to support the person of the Supreme Leader. Whenever he comes out in public, and he's been in some of the crowds there, and you can see him there. You wouldn't recognize him probably, but he's been there. I mean, he's not in hiding. He's at his Husseiniya. He's been going to his Husseiniya on Fridays. He's not hiding, and he's not frightened. He's made it quite clear, that he expects that he may die in this process. And so he's nominated to 3 possible successors to follow him, should he be assassinated. But he takes it very phlegmatically.
Yes, and let's go down that path here, because that's one of the other things. General McKenzie said he didn't think that there was going to be any attack coming. He said didn't necessarily think there was going to be, maybe diplomacy, but that would then require, even for his version to work, that would require Iran to have to give into all those points you made at the beginning of this show here that you say, and according to what the Friday prayers was, I think one of the Ayatollahs at Friday prayers today said that no, we're not going to give in at all on the proxy issue and on the long-range missile issue. It's just on this limited band of nuclear. That would almost imply then that we're at a diplomatic impasse and that there is no process to go forward. So first of all, just on that narrow point, do you see any possibility with all this firepower that would be enough to coerce Iran with this big fist to give in on these other issues diplomatically?
No, I don't. And first of all, as I said to you, I'm pretty sure of this, that the Iranians are not about to make any substantive concessions beyond what I've just said to you. They will not accept any of those demands of the United States, and they're not about to change that. They will continue to make their case for a very limited, if you like, enrichment, and they will stand on the principle that they have a right under the nuclear NPT, the Proliferation Treaty, to enrich. Peaceful enrichment is written into the treaty, and they will stand by that. When they look at this great force, look, you're a military person, I'm not. But I think most of the Iranians who are really very adept at all of this understands what they are facing and are confident in it, because they understand that actually that those vessels off the Persian Gulf are quite vulnerable. They're vulnerable to many of the tactics that the Iranians have. I think I've mentioned it once or twice before, but I mean, that whole cliff is honeycombed with ship to shore, shore to ship missiles. They have advanced anti-ship missiles all along that coastline, dug deep into the tunnels in the coastline. They have air defenses which were never tested. There are two great lies that underlie, where we are at the moment. One deceit was that all of those Nantaz, Isfahan were destroyed. They were not destroyed by Trump in his. It was during the 12-day war, and the other one is that the Israelis destroyed Iran's nuclear missiles. It's not nuclear; it's their missile armaments, and destroyed their air defenses. That is not true. The air defenses they destroyed were by sabotage. They sent small cells across the border, mostly from the Kurdish area, from Kermanshah province, and they had with them small attack drones and, believe it or not, anti-tank missiles, and they got as close as they could to the first radar protection of the Iranians. And they attacked those. And for a time, it caused confusion to Iran because they didn't know where this attack was coming from. It was coming from small groups on the ground. And they solved it entirely by cutting off the internet, which meant that these small cells lost their targeting data coming from the American battlescape system, that was satellite battlescape system that was feeding details of radar systems and where they're moving. Now they've changed it a lot, and now they have much more advanced radars and radars that can pick up stealth aircraft. So I think,
and I want to get on that here because that's a really important point to make about what could be coming next. I just showed you McKenzie. He thinks that maybe a good fist will still have a chance for diplomatic. But there was a retired Admiral Winfield who made this comment here just before the talk yesterday, where he says if it doesn't come out to a good outcome, and it doesn't appear that it did in terms of anybody agreeing to anything, he says this is his warning.
He's assembled an amazing amount of force in the region that cannot stay there forever. I think that this Thursday is going to be a critical point where there's a meeting in Geneva between the U.S. and Iranian side. If Iran doesn't produce something really meaningful that Donald Trump can seize on as a victory, and it doesn't have to be everything, because Donald Trump never always gets everything he wants, but he gets a lot. If they come through at the table on Thursday, then this crisis could easily simmer back down. But if they don't, there's a very good chance that we could see some action over the weekend, I think.
So that's what he thinks. It could come over the weekend. Now, that presents to Trump administration a real problem. If he doesn't come up with a diplomatic breakthrough, the American people, by several recent polls, are strongly against the kinetic use of force against Iran to try and get this thing solved, big time again. So if he has this war of choice just because he didn't get the diplomatic end he want, despite all the efforts of Naftali Bennett and Lindsey Graham and several of these others, people are against this, and so he would have to risk diplomatic problems at home. So now then, according to a Political article here a couple of days ago, there is some talk that, hey, you know what would be great? What if we had the Israelis actually start the conflict and then kind of drew us in there? Because then Iran would retaliate against Americans in the region, hit some of our bases, maybe our ships, maybe knock some planes down, and then we would have to go in, and then the American public would support that. Now, there is, and I'm looking at it right here on my phone here, somebody just posted this to X, and they literally have some videos. Somebody was flying out of Ben Gurion Airport, and they said there are 20 Boeing KC-135 refueling aircrafts on the ground in Tel Aviv. And there are a whole squadron of F-22s that are reported to have been there, I think, yesterday. So it looks like a lot of American combat power and those refueling tankers on the ground in Israel, which might seem that maybe Israel is going to be the one to initiate this. What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, the F-22s are not at Ben Gurion. They're in another airport, military airport. And it's true, a squadron of, I think you call them weasels or whatever.
Wild weasels.
F-22s are wild weasels are there. These are the aircraft that are to suppress air defenses and to create an open path for attack aircraft to come in. Yes, they're there. And those refueling aircraft are there. But these refueling aircraft that everyone is attaching information reflect something important. They reflect the fact that the Israelis and the Americans are having to put their aircraft really far away from Iran. It's now their main base. They've largely evacuated Al Udeid base of aircraft, and they're putting them all in Jordan. And that means that actually for F-35s, look, I'm not a military expert, you are, but the F-35, especially if they're in stealth mode, I mean, don't have a very long period in flight. And that means that they will have to be refueled almost as they come into Iran. This will all give Iran a good opportunity to prepare their air defenses. And as I say, I think you will find that the radar systems that Iran has and will be using will be capable of seeing stealth aircraft. They were before, by the way, the Iranians own one. I remember very well that actually during that doom period, there was a planned attack on Iran, and that the pilots were calling in, and it was, I know because it was sort of going live over the Israeli radio and saying, look, we've been locked onto by some unknown radar, and we're not going to be able to go into Iranian airspace. I think things like that will occur again. And the high proportion of, why would they send, a whole squadron of F-22 air defense suppressing aircraft there if they thought there were no air defenses? I mean, they wouldn't have bothered to do that. So clearly they are worried about that, and rightly so. They did not enter airspace during those 12-day war. They actually were all the missiles were fired from standoff positions in Syria and Azerbaijan. So they didn't actually get into Iran during that period. So the Iranians are looking, first of all, at the flotilla, the armada, as it's called, of sea, which is now pushed far back from the coast because of their worry about the missiles. They recall what happened in Yemen, when also there were two carriers in the position and had to leave because they were struck by a missile and had to withdraw. And so they're not, they're not sitting there trembling at all at the site, and they have some responses to offer. And I would suggest to you, I mean, maybe we will find out in due course. I would suggest that actually the responses are going to give something of a surprise.
So let me ask you a question here. There's a lot of information out released, not threats or not neither threats nor rumors, but the Chinese have been releasing more and more satellite imagery of American military assets in the region. To include here, 3 hours ago, they released satellite shows US F-22 Raptors moving around at the Israeli Ovda, I believe it's pronounced, airbase.
That's right. That's where
what do you make of this? That the Chinese are providing it publicly intelligence. This is not what they're given to them through intel, but they're providing it publicly to say, we're showing people where this are. What does that tell you about what might be happening behind the scenes?
What it tells you is that actually, and I mentioned it on this program to you before, is that the Chinese are effectively have been giving Iran the Baidu system. That was the system Link 17 that was used by Pakistan against India and was very effective. If you remember, it shot down many Rafale jets of India. And they've given them, in the terms of their partnership agreement, the most advanced military standard, data protection. And they have the satellites. The Chinese are telling you, it's quite clearly. Do you think they're putting all these photographs of the F-22s, the Weasels, and the refueling aircraft up there just for fun? They're sending you a signal to say, look, we have our satellites. They have an intelligence boat just off the shore of the Gulf, which is both jammed with intercept equipment. It's also capable of mapping undersea, so detecting submarines. And it is linked into the Beidou system, which gives them, like you have with ISR, this was your biggest gift to the Ukrainians, was not, Patriot missiles, it was ISR. And so I think you may be surprised. I don't know. I can't say that it's definitely there. But what I think those images are a message to say, we will know. And what's more, I think you'll find that the Iranians will know as soon as you start the preparations for an attack. They will see people loading, if you like, the bombs on aircraft. And that might be the trigger and the start of the conflict. Not waiting to be attacked, but actually the moment that it is clear that the decision to attack has been taken by Washington.
And let me show people why that's a big of a risk. This is from the Institute for the Study of War, and you see here on the map here the ranges of many of the short range, different kinds of short range ballistic missiles, and you see a lot of this goes all the way into Israel. Especially those on the outside of the band here. But even as you get closer, some of these American bases in Iraq, for example, in Qatar, are in range already of multiple rounds, multiple types of these. Some of our, I don't know if we still have anything in Syria or not. There's been some reports we move those around. But if what you say is correct, and Iran says, hey, you know what? As soon as with China's help or whatever help, we see it, here comes the Air Armada, they're going to start firing. I mean, look at all of these things that are in the range of the range of ballistic missiles, especially before anything gets taken out. That could be a real problem for our side.
Well, I repeat to you, as soon as there is an attack, this talk about a limited attack, it just is not workable, because the Iranians have said, and they are very clear about it, any attack by America or Israel, it's all-out war. And they will attack American bases and Israel at the same time. If they are attacked, then you have to expect they will attack US bases and US economic targets as well in that region. And also you will find, I suspect, that particularly from some places, there will be others joining the conflict at that point. Iraq There will be from Iraq attacks and also from Yemen and maybe from other places, maybe from Lebanon, maybe from other places too. So it will be a much wider war. It won't be just
well, and that is a real
against-
problem. A couple of things that Gary was showing earlier in this, I want to ask you about right now, because that is really, really important for especially our American audience to really understand here. Gary showed you a sign earlier, or a headline earlier, that on the Washington Post yesterday, Vice President J.D. Vance was saying, hey, there is no possibility that we're going to get into a drawn-out war here, because he knows diplomatic or domestically that is like poison to the administration. So they don't want to get that. So he has signaled, we're definitely not going to do that. If anything, we're probably talking about some pinpoint things. You just talked about how Iran doesn't view anything as pinpoint. One strike equals everything is for them. You also had, Gary was also showing you some of the videos where you have these underground cities, these missile cities, where they have all kinds of drones, production capacities, etc., that they can survive a whole lot of bombs coming in from the United States, even whatever gets through their air defense systems, however good they may be. And it seems to me that Iran is taking this as saying, hey, listen, I see that they probably already knew this because you said they studied us before. But now then you have Vice President Vance saying, we can't get into a long drawn out war. Does this say, to me, that was a big mistake to signal that publicly to an American audience, because you could get drawn into that very thing. And that gives motivation and incentive to the Iranian side to make sure you get into a long drawn out war to potentially lose. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, they're really making the best of a bad job, because I'm sure you've seen, as everyone in Iran has, who's involved has seen it, the Financial Times articles quoting Israeli intelligence saying that at most the United States will be able to maintain intensive air attacks into Iran for 4 to 5 days, an absolute outside limit a week if they were less intense. So, I mean, it's presented as a sort of another alternative, as if this is this is a sort of choice. It's not a choice. And from the beginning, the Iranians have based their intelligence and understanding is that America military tactics are sort of shoot and scoot. You fire and then you go. And that the shock and awe that lasts a little while and then it collapses, and it's the long attrition that is possible. So if you get out a map and you look at Iran, look at the size of it. It is the size of Western Europe. It's huge. Compare it with Israel. You can cross Israel in 40 minutes by car. It's tiny. Population, its Jewish population is about 7 million, 90 plus million in Iran. And their missile cities that you just presented and you showed are dispersed across the whole of that territory. It's like the whole of Western Europe separate, and they are all both autonomous and able to operate even if they lose command and control structures. They have plans to continue. Each of those 57 units is capable of making their own decisions. The missiles are fired from underground, not through mobile missile firing. This is a deterrence, and they've always believed, that the answer to an American attack is slow attrition. I saw the same when I was in Lebanon during the war, 2006 war. And everyone said, oh, it'll be over in 3 days, it's done. I mean, how can, Hezbollah, a movement, stand up against, the best army in the Middle East, Israel? It's impossible. They will be destroyed. And in fact, it ended with Israel asking for the ceasefire that was translated into Resolution 1701 after 35 days of attacks. And the Israelis were admitting they'd run out of targets and they were running out of munitions at the same time. So, in all my experience, which is, I know, not the same as your experience, but all my experience is that the sooner the war starts, all the plans evaporate within 24 hours. Everyone who said the war is going to be lasting this many days and that and so on, don't believe them, because it's never like that. And what's more, there will always be surprises, I believe, in conflict. That's why I don't make a definite prediction what is going to happen. We don't know what is going to happen, but I do expect the unexpected. There will be the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns.
We actually had a phrase in the Army that no plan survives first contact. That's what we assumed. We literally did all of these detailed plannings with the understanding that they would all go to crap. So you had to be able to be flexible off of it.
Exactly.
But now here there is another interesting idea that's floated by a lot of people in the United States, because many people have said, listen, we see that bounce of power. We understand that's missile cities. We understand the underground bunkers and all that kind of thing. So we know they can sustain some stuff, but this is what they seem to be pinning their hope on. The regime has never been as weak as it is right now. It's a house of cards, and if you push hard enough, it's going to fall. And there's one guy who has a really keen idea on this, and that is Senator Ted Cruz, who suggests maybe we arm the protesters.
What I've urged the president, do not miss this opportunity. If the Ayatollah is removed from power, it will make America much safer. This is the leading state sponsor of terrorism in the world. The Iranian regime is responsible for murdering hundreds of American servicemen and women. They fund terrorists all over the world. And so what I've urged the president is, number one, support the protesters and arm the protesters. Let the people of Iran, give them the ability to overthrow their government. And number two, I think there's a very real possibility we will see, potentially in a matter of days, limited strikes. What we're not going to see is boots on the ground.
So we don't want our boots on the ground. We want Iranian boots on the ground. And hey, you guys come up, we'll give you some rifles. Is that a viable path?
He obviously just doesn't follow what's been going on, because this was the uprising that the CIA and the Western intelligence service were stimulating in Iran, which failed. It didn't bring down the state. I mean, the so-called protests, most of these had come in from overseas, came in from the MEK, Mujahid Khalq, had come in from Armenia. They were armed and provided with weapons. Some were smuggled in. The uprising was an attempt to bring down, and it was based on this theory again, Iran is a house of cards, it'll all collapse, one puff and it'll fall. And look what happened. And even the Israelis admit that actually their attempt, to foster an uprising had failed. They said, where were the defections from the political class? Where were the defections from the army, from the IRGC, from the Basij militia? We didn't see that. It didn't come. In fact, the people rallied around them and rallied against these protesters who used extreme violence. I mean, they've been trained, and they trained in a way to create the sort of violent image that would convey on television the idea of if you like, a state that is wobbling like a sort of big building on fire, everyone running for the exits and going out, and it never happened. And the Israelis themselves and their intelligence assesses that it was never realistic, that this was never going to happen on this recent attack during the protests. In January, that was never going to happen, perhaps never would happen, because the government, the structure of the state was intact. So I think that, he ought to actually, go and examine what's happened. Do some due diligence. Why don't you do some really concerted work to understand what's happened there and what the situation is, instead of sort of spouting out these ideas that you've pulled out of nowhere, and which are, well, they're your opinion, but they're fine, but they're not supported by any evidence, because we've seen, and it's not me saying this, You look at things like the Israeli, security think tanks like INSS and others. They say what I've just said to you, that it didn't work, the attempt to foster. And he's welcome to go to land at Tehran by helicopter or somewhere and to go and look for the protesters. I mean, he'll get a sharp shock when he looks for them. There's no organized opposition there to arm. And how would he get the arms in? It reminds me of a story I remember during the Libya fight. And this is not about America, but it was with the British trying to do the same thing, overthrow Gaddafi. And then they landed a helicopter with some special forces in it, and they landed there, and people sort of gathered around looking at them, and they kept saying they had an interpreter, and they said, well, where's the opposition? Where's the opposition? And everyone said, oh, what are you talking about? And they were literally sort of going around, landing on the ground, saying, we have to find the opposition. Where's the opposition? Well, he's welcome to try in Tehran. Good luck to him.
And so just in the last few minutes we have here, where do you think we're going next? Because obviously we have all this firepower there. A lot of it continues to flow in. You have General McKenzie who's saying, maybe we won't, maybe we'll find a negotiated settlement of some sort. You have Admiral Winfield who says, yeah, I think that since nothing happened on Thursday, something this weekend could potentially happen. Where do you see this going?
Well, it's impossible to say because this lies in the minds of two men. I mean, first of all, Trump is the operational mind that has to give the orders, and that of Netanyahu, and those that sit around him, because Netanyahu has made it very clear. And I mean, one of the paradoxes to all that you've been saying to me is that in the meeting at Mar-a-Lago, the Israeli press, that was in the end of December, the New Year meetings, actually Netanyahu was arguing with Trump that the nuclear issue wasn't the issue at all. He said, no, forget it. I'm not going to come to you and say, they're sort of 5 weeks from a bomb. What I'm saying is the missiles are the problem. In fact, the missiles have changed everything because the missiles are becoming so sophisticated and elaborate that it makes nuclear weapons almost redundant, or certainly much less important to us. And what is worrying us is that they're not just restoring, if you like, their missile defenses. This is a completely new paradigm, and they have an umbrella that we will not be able to penetrate, even if we knew they were building a weapon, which we don't. If we knew that they were building, we wouldn't be able to penetrate it because they would be under this umbrella and we wouldn't be able to take military action against them. So, I mean, even then, he was making it clear that, to talk about, the threat of military weapons. We've heard this for 20 years. I mean, every year Netanyahu's been saying, how many times? You recall him going to the UN?
Yeah.
He's on the thing
The
saying
little bomb
it's close
picture.
to a bomb. Yeah, exactly. We've been hearing this year after year. But at Mar-a-Lago, he inverted it completely, selling to Trump and saying, put the missiles above the nuclear issue because nuclear issue is not so important. We want you to bomb the missile affairs. But as I say to you, look at the map. They are spread across 57 different command areas of Iran, which is the size of Western Europe. That's going to be quite a job, I think, to try and destroy. They're buried down in silos. They can't fired from silos, not from, some will be fired from mobile launchers, and mostly in the mountains, where they too are kept in tunnels, and they just come out of the tunnels and are quickly, within seconds, withdrawn back into tunnels. I don't think it'll be just an easy war if it's a war. And my feeling is that, first of all, I can't can't predict. I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't predict, what way Trump will wake up one morning and
The psychiatrist is the right.
what Netanyahu will have said to him whispered in his ear in the previous night. But I would think, the momentum and the pressure on him. Imagine, this is a man who likes to win and to have winning stories, to make historic achievement. Pulling back a force like that is going to not be a win. I'd finally say, actually, I believe that Mr. Trump is very much trapped. He would like to have an achievement in Iran, but equally, he knows that if he goes to a long, big war against Iran, if he has no option but to go to a big war in Iran, this could be the end of his presidency, that he would be ending his presidency at the midterm elections. So he has an absolute trap. So predicting which way he will come out, maybe he will just try and pretend something in the negotiations wasn't what we thought it was, but it's actually a huge achievement. This is a great victory for us. He might try to do that. I don't think it'll work. It won't be very persuasive to people, but he may try that. But otherwise, he's got all these forces there. The momentum is for that. The Israelis are pressing hard on that, and their auxiliaries in the United States. And so, the chances, who knows? It might go one way or the other way. He's not a predictable person.
Yeah, you've really summed it up very well. That's all those things are at play. Every one of it could go any of those directions. Trump has done all of those before, so it's a roll of the dice to figure it out. The only thing we know is that, at least according to media reports this week, is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, has reportedly told Trump that there are huge risks to this, which he would certainly be, and his political advisors be talking about. Here's the consequences if it doesn't go that way. So let's hope that those political pressures and the loss of his prestige and the remainder of his time and term of office could be just completely destroyed by this. Let's hope that pressures him into it. And I will be the first one to cheer if he comes up with even some kind of a lame excuse of a negotiated settlement that prevents war and prevents all these deaths. I would be all for that. But as you say, we're going to have to wait and see how it's going to happen, because nobody but Donald Trump knows.
Exactly.
But anyway, boy, we are so grateful to having you come on today with this really, really insightful and comprehensive understanding of the totality, both of the Iranian side, the American side, and the Israeli side. All of this is in a big mosaic put together to have an understanding, and you have really provided us that today. Really appreciate that. And of course, we recommend folks that, man, don't wait just until Ambassador, I'm sorry, you said you don't want me to call you Ambassador, former diplomat, Alastair Crooke has on the Substack that you're seeing right there, conflictsforum.substack.com. Man, keep up with what he's got there, because it is gold. Thank you very much for coming on today.